Welcome to Screen Interactions. In OutSystems, several of the screen interactions will begin with buttons and links. So in this session, we're going to focus on interacting with our app and using the link widget or the button widget to do that. And with link and button widgets, we can either navigate or we can submit to different screens. So we'll look at the navigate screen lifecycle, and we'll also look at the submit screen lifecycle and how when we submit to the same screen, there may be a few different ways we can do that. And we'll finish up by talking about the download widget in case we wish to interact, and part of that interaction is to download a file or something like that. So let's go ahead and get started. So when we begin interacting with our app, most of the time when users are interacting with the app, they're not just typing in URLs because they can remember all of the flow of the application. It's much more common for them to have forms and buttons and links where they can go ahead and click on those links and fill in the forms and submit things with buttons. So each time a user clicks one of those links or buttons, they're navigating to a new page or they're submitting data to the server. And any of those interactions start a brand new request response lifecycle. So when we think about the links and the buttons inside of OutSystems, both of them will be doing the same types of things, so they have similar types of behavior. And if we look over at a link widget and we look at a button widget, so here we can see a save button and a save link, we see that they have almost the exact same set of attributes. And that's because basically they do very similar things, and the only difference is that links can enclose other widgets. So the links become a little more flexible because the button is always going to take up some space and have usually some sort of text description in the button, where the link could look as strange or as different as we want it to look. Now, one thing that's important for both of these is we know what happens when they're clicked. So there is an on-click property that will either submit a request to an action or have us navigate to a new screen. So when something is clicked, we need to know which of those we're going to navigate to, and there's a method property that will determine how that information is going to get submitted to the server. And that method will end up having a destination, and that can either be a screen action or another screen. So if we look over real quickly at the link, here we can see this on-click area. The on-click has a method, and in this case it's set to submit, and then it has a destination, which is the save. So here we see the button with the exact same types of settings. So these are the types of things we use to describe the behavior that we wish the link or the button to have. So if we use the navigate, so when we looked at the method, there can be either navigation or there can be submits. So the navigate method uses the HTTP GET method. So that's one of the HTTP request response options inside of a communication with the server. And a GET just requests a specific resource. It is not submitting any extra data to the server. So any parameters that might be available would be sent in the URL for the screen that we're trying to navigate to, and anything that might be in the form, like input variables or anything else, are not sent. And if we hover on the button or on the link, the URL will actually be shown inside the browser. So if the user is hovering on one of these, they can see the destination URL as to where they'd be navigating to. And when we use links and buttons with a navigate method, then we're either going to go to a target screen inside our app, or we'll go to an external URL to some other page or screen outside of our application. So again, we would set the navigate method here and the destination down below. So how would this work? Well, let's imagine we're on the movie screen and we have a list of movies. And in the name of the movie, we turn the name of the movie into a link. Well, if the name of the movie on the movie screen is a link, then we probably just wish to navigate to the details screen for that movie. So if we click on the link, it will have a navigate method set to it, and it will begin calling the movie details screen. So as it calls that screen, it initializes the variables, it calls the preparation, and then it will go ahead and when the preparation is complete, it will look at the definition of the screen and start building up the HTML that will be used to render that screen in the browser. So once it's done getting all the data from the preparation and it renders the screen, it sends the response back, and when it gets to the browser will actually take the movie detail HTML and then render that screen in the browser so that they can see the details of that movie. Now, if that's the navigate option, how is it different and what would change if we use the submit? Well, submit uses HTTP post instead of HTTP get. And post does what it sounds like in that it is posting data to the server as part of the request. And that post can either be posting a file or posting extra data like the information that might be in the form input fields. If we hover over the link or the button, it will show the URL that is going to handle the request. So whenever we have a link or a button that is using submit, then the destination might be a screen action that will be on the current screen to go ahead and handle the information being posted to the server, or we could still target another screen inside of our app, or we could target an external URL. So here we see an example of save where we're seeing that the method is submit, and it's going to call the save screen action to be able to navigate to that. Now when we're submitting to a screen action, that submit method was going to go ahead and call this action. And a screen action in OutSystems is a flow of statements that are executed in that order. So here we can see the flow of a screen action, and sometimes when we describe actions we talk about the action flow, and the action flow has a start and it will have some sort of end node. And here you can see we have two different ends. So here the flow of this screen action starts by saying, was the information in the screen valid? If it wasn't, send an invalid feedback message and then stop and end, so go back to that screen. If it is valid, then we can update the movie and send a nice feedback message and then just go back to the screen that we were working on. So this screen action has a flow, and because we're doing low-code visual development, it's very easy for us to read kind of what's happening inside of these flows. When we're inside of a screen action, the screen action has access to all of the elements inside of the screen's scope. So all of the widgets and their variables, and if we remember, the widgets make copies of their source elements, so we can access any of the values that were in the widgets, and that shows us the data that the widget was displaying. We can get access to anything from the preparation and any of the screen variables that were passed in. So the action flow has access to everything that might be inside of the scope of the screen, and that will help us go ahead and determine what to do when something is submitted to the server to specifically this action. Now the last node of actions will actually have an impact on the overall screen's lifecycle. So it's important to know when we finish, do we want an end node or do we want something different? So when we get to finishing a flow for a screen action flows can have lots of different end nodes. Some of those end nodes will stay on the same screen. Some of these end nodes would navigate to a different screen, and sometimes that's inside of our app. Sometimes we just navigate back to the same screen, or sometimes we navigate outside of our app. And sometimes we need to raise an exception. So here we can see one way to end a screen action is just a simple end node, and then the action finishes and the screen lifecycle continues. We can end with a download where we actually send a file back to the user. We can go back to the login screen we could go back to the current screen. So we can go to another screen inside of our app, come right back to the screen we're on, or we can go to a screen outside of our application. And if there's a problem, we can actually just throw an exception and have something try to catch and deal with that exception. So there are a lot of different ways we can finish the screen action to go ahead and influence how we're dealing with the information that was submitted to the server. So if we think about this from a screen lifecycle, and we think about it using an end node, maybe we were on the movie details screen, and we try to submit some information and save it. So we've updated some information about the movie. If we click on the button, and the button has a submit method, it calls the save screen action. That screen action does the work inside of the action flow, and then it gets to the end node. And when it gets to the end node, it goes back to the preparation of the screen, reloads any of that information that's needed, and then it goes ahead and builds and re-renders the screen and sends it back to the browser, which can display it again. So in this particular case, if we think about that, we may wish to have the screen, save the information that we just changed about the movie, and then remember that we want to give the user a message saying everything was saved correctly. It would then run the preparation, build up the screen, and when it sent it back, the HTML would include the ability to give the user the message that everything was saved successfully. Now, what if we did it a little differently, and instead of using an end node, we actually used a destination instead? So we'll look at a slightly different example where if we're on the movie screen and we have one of the links here, one of the links might be to go ahead and edit or change one of the movies. And in that case, we might be sending some information. We could go ahead and set that link to have a submit method. It would call the screen action in the movie screen. And then if it needed to go to a different destination, like the movie details screen, it would go ahead and forward that request so that we're basically being navigated over to the next screen. It would create the variables, call the preparation for the movie detail, render and build the movie details screen, and send back the movie details screen instead. So how we end inside of a screen action will decide what gets called next, and sometimes it's the same screen and sometimes it's a separate screen. Now, when we're in a submit method, what's the difference between going to the end node and asking it to navigate back to the current screen? It would seem that if the application is going to stay on the same screen in both cases, then the preparation is going to get run and the entire screen will be rendered and rebuilt. So are these two things different, or what happens? And the answer is yes, they are different. And the difference is that when we have an end node, any of the values of the screen variables and the widgets from the first time we rendered the screen, those are kept and they are not rewritten and they're not overwritten or changed in any way. When we actually go to a destination, which is the current screen, it reinitializes everything. So the values of any of the variables coming in and the widgets, all of those are reset to their default values. So we're actually trying to re-render the screen kind of in a default or way as if we navigated to it originally and the other things that we did didn't actually happen. So the end remembers the interactions and the data that we had the first time we were on the screen, and the current screen kind of ignores or forgets all of that. So last but not least, when we're interacting with the screens, sometimes people will click on a button and we want to go ahead and allow someone to download a file. So sometimes a link or a button will give the user the ability to download files. The download widget will help us do that. It will have file content, which will be the binary data of the file. We should give the file a name, and then it has an attribute called save to disk. So we can either just try to display something if the browser knows how to display that type of file, or we can kind of force it to say, hey, we expect this to be saved. A download will actually end the action flow. So there won't be any statements after that, and the preparation is not going to run again. because basically we're just going right back to the screen at that point saying here's the file that you asked for. So when we look at the flow in that case, we could check if the file exists, and if it doesn't, then we give them a feedback saying sorry, we can't find the file. But if it does exist, then we actually send it back to them. And here you can see our download widget cares about the content, cares about the name of the file, and then should we save it to disk. And in this case, because it's set to yes, it will go ahead and try to save the file for us. So in this session, we talked a lot about interacting with apps and how the link widget and the button widget can help us do that. Those two widgets are fairly similar, and both can be used to either navigate away from a screen to another screen, or they can be used to submit data to the same screen or to other screens. And we looked at a number of the different cases and how we can kind of control that depending on the end node we choose. And then we looked at the download widget quickly to make sure if we need to download files to our users that they'll be able to do that. So that's it for this session on screen interactions. Thanks for listening.